So, hello. Thanks so much for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Eric. Yeah, my name is Moises Sanabria, and I am an interdisciplinary artist working with creative technology in various forms, from coding to performance, photography, and since 2018 moving deeply into the AI space in many mediums as well. So just to give out a short bio, these are some of my my favorite works in terms of like my PFP, my profile, where I'm always just kind of looking at like what's that association to like things that are digital, like how close are you really to the digital space, and in a very physical and like photographic standpoint, like taking these photos and talking about that, like how tapped in you are to this digital space. And this is a collaboration with two other artists named John Yui and Tom Gal. We started doing these type of performative photos on Instagram back in 2016. These are a few other of the works we would do where it could be like an immersive space, like thinking a lot about like dreams. And, now you could say even like metaverses where you're in your workplace, you're in your, studying time, but you're also like on the internet and you're like deeply in this like grass field, um, or you're eating while you're working. And there were physical photographs, but talking about digital spaces in some way.
Hmm.
And then one of the most uh, favorite works that I have is the VR hug, which we also released on Instagram. It's kind of this idea of like physicality through some medium. How, in this photo, like who's hugging who, like are there virtual emotions, are there physical uh, connections happening, and how those two things are always blending. This is another work called MacBook Selfie Stick. So there you can actually see Tom, but we constructed this very hardware laptop selfie stick, and just to like keep expanding on this like absurdist idea of like hardware, like big hardware that you're still using as a selfie stick and doing it in a public space. So we would do these across the cities in New York, for example. Other types of works we've done in collaboration are these like symbolic weapons called corp gear. And the idea is you take these very corporate logos and you turn them into like real swords or knives and crowbars. Let me see if we might have a few others in my insert. Uh, Other kind of explorations have been through other contexts. So like Yifan and I, where we grew up, we would see technology being hung, or like even sneakers being hung on cables. And it's like, what if you have like high-end technology like keyboards or Kinects and VR headsets hanging from these cables? Uh, this piece is it's just this looping GIF of the my friend giving me this full punch in the face while I'm still in virtual reality, and just thinking through, what happens when you are completely like engulfed with like a new technology. Like there's obviously opportunity, but there's also something you're blinded by because it's so shiny and so innovative and technologic. And at the time it was VR, and I would say a lot of where we are now is AI. It's like, but there's a vulnerable space to it, and also like an awe, like this digital awe. Some other works we've done also getting more into like the fashion space, thinking through like lifestyle. And so what we did is we did a Google search of our names, my friend Manny and I, and we just wore our search results.
Hmm.
So kind of thinking through the idea of like wearing your data, like living, owning your data, or thinking about your data in a very active way as you go through your physical and digital space. Uh, This is the piece I did for Cooper Union where I graduated, called Google Gradients. And back in 2015, I think this starts relating a lot to the AI stuff, is content aware images, content aware search was now possible. And so you can drag an image for the first time, and maybe you dragged in a giraffe, and then you'd get all these giraffe results. So we were able to create this large data set of different types of results, curated by some color, because we're thinking through building this landscape. So, now that I gave all that context, I just want to say that all of our works through that was kind of performative and thinking through like memes and how like images spread through the internet. And now I think with AI, that's just like an expansion of that. Like we're headed in a space where all of these AI things are actually going to lead us to expression and AI that's even more um, frequent. Like we're going to be using it a lot more. Like I mean, it's already in our phones. It's already in many of our devices, but it'll be ingrained in just how we create in general. Like I think the idea of choosing between like making something with AI or not, it's going to be harder every day unless you're just using a pencil or a chalkboard or something very physical that's not, tied to compute basically.
Mm.
Um, and so I showed this image to my sister for the first time. I was showing her Dali, she's 12 years old. And the first thing she said was like, "Oh, is this where memes come from?" And I just thought very like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like that's totally true. Like if you have no idea, like you're 12 and you have no idea about the level of technology and compute, and someone shows you this magical thing that just makes whatever you want and it's gonna be funny or like absurd, you could think like, oh, all those memes I've been seeing on my tablet, like they probably come from this place. And that, to tie memes to AI, that to me, that's it's like a trend into how quickly it'll be easy to use AI in everything we do, like text messages or GIFs, um,
Mm.
just things to like easily express yourself. So uh, that's a lot of my interest in this space right now, is just thinking about like accessibility and in education too, because like as we get more into understanding what it can do, we should also learn how it works.
Right.
Uh, so my presentation in general is about that. It's like how or where can we be of how fast we're accelerating through the use of AI in a creative way or visual way. So it's imagination at the intersection of prompt engineering and conceptual art. And so I'll give more context to both of those words. But in general, this idea of like technology is making us accelerate in the creative space really quickly. And it's, in the next decade or so, a lot of things that are happening are going to be influenced very heavily by AI. So to give context to those two words, so conceptual art is art in which the idea or concept presented by the artist is considered more important than its appearance or execution. So, honing in here on the idea. I think in relation to AI art, the idea and the intention behind through which you use the tool should also be like a core concept that's going to make it stand out from just being like an input output kind of application that everyone's using casually. So I'm very inspired by conceptual art. Some history in the AR art space. I love this piece in relation to thinking about AI. So Joseph Kosuth did 1 in 3 chairs, and it's like the definition of a chair through a photo, through a physical 3D object, and the dictionary definition of the chair. So now relating it to large language models that operate like multimodally, where they do associate all these various definitions, whether it's an image, text, or I mean, even some models are starting to do 3D. So this is here on the right, Joseph Kosuth. And then on the left is Sol LeWitt, variations on an incomplete cube. In this project, he has these physical sculptures, but they started actually from the idea of how many variations can I make of these sculptures by understanding that it's a cube, but it's always open. And so he almost created a formula or an algorithm, and then based on that algorithm, executed all the permutations. And then the other word we were talking about is prompt engineering, which is a concept in artificial intelligence, particularly natural language processing, where the description of the task is embedded in the input. So, this is that first step. This is that idea that in conceptual art, or that algorithm in conceptual art, that starts a process. So in prompt engineering, you have this input. Uh, this is a tweet that I was kind of like just brainstorming and my thoughts in prompt engineering, where I'm thinking through, usually in general, it's a text that you put with modifiers, but how do you start thinking through that text in a more algorithmic way, or like scalable way, where things aren't only like your specific text, but they're variables that mean other things in the future. So you can eventually create an algorithm that generates the type of sentences or ideas that you'd like to make. So in this tweet example, is this idea of like always have a camera angle, a movie genre, a composition, whether it's like messy or a clean composition, or the aesthetic, whether it's digital art or it's photography. And then by being able to understand all these modifiers in your prompt, you can like expand how much you can imagine, because you can make more prompts. Like you can make 50 or 100 prompts based on like, oh, I want to talk about nature, but let me look at it through 50 prompts by making this one formula. And these are the kind of accelerations that creative AI art is now letting you do. And it's very contentious. There's definitely a lot of debate either way. But I think I'm really interested in the possibility space, and like being able to share where like imagination production is headed. And then now to connect a little bit of past works that in very interesting ways relate to the AI artwork I'm doing. Uh, I would make ideas without understanding how I would make them. I would just draw them. I would make like a sentence, and then I would just have a mood board next to that idea. And it was just a way to create a budget around to eventually make a sculpture. Like I come from like fine art sculpture, uh, but I was always interested in conceptual art. So back again to the idea was going to lead to the sculpture. And now with AI art, I'm able to basically input these previous works and just start generating, maybe not 3D sculptures yet, but already thinking of like, how could those things look? So here with the concept of the walking iPad, now I have these like humanoid laptop things, and I could start thinking like, oh, maybe I know how to make that, or how to find that material, or how to share this with some kind of production or industrial engineer that would help me connect this to a hardware device. Um, not all the works are fully physical necessarily. Like I'm definitely interested in like absurdist or dreamlike kind of exploration. So this idea of like the moment you're born, you never realize you've been wearing a VR headset the whole time, and that's just part of your constant state. And also thinking through like bots that take care of babies in some way. So there's always this concept of simulation. And the reason I guess what I'm trying to connect is like, how does your artistic process and like the technological trends or societal trends can correlate, and then you can notice patterns to expand your awareness and potential impact. Like for me as an artist, that's definitely one of the things I'm more interested in, is how art, whether it's AI or sculpture or anything, um, helps you say things that are harder to say with language or with a movie. Like sometimes an art object is the medium through which you can explain like very complicated things, or like start to talk about those things. One reason I'm very bullish in AI in general, there was this tweet by Aram Sabeti a few years ago, and it really impacted me. It said the generative age, uh, AI will do for content production what the internet did for distribution. And I grew up as the internet was forming and things like that. I was very young at the time, but to think before, like you needed to be, in order to be to be seen, you needed to be in a magazine, a TV channel, some kind of satellite network. You needed to know the right people, and the internet allowed everyone to have their own website. You just needed to know what the website was, and you can log in. So I think when he means AI will do for content production is everyone will be able to do many things they weren't able to before, like maybe in a decade or now, like everyone graduating might have already made a movie in order to graduate, or like has to write a book, or like do these things that were definitely a lot harder to do. But because we have AI, we can produce at a higher level of content. We can accelerate our creativity and content production a lot faster. This is another kind of diagram that I've been dissecting for a few years, but it's called the evolution of culture over time, and kind of this idea that you have high culture, pop culture, and internet culture, and then there's different densities at which they operate. So internet culture is very big and very chaotic, where there's memes, there's social, there's video games, there's streaming, but there's a lot going on. And then as you kind of get into these like curated spaces that are more refined, and they're gated in some way, like there's a curator, there is, you have to have a token, or you have to have some kind of social proof. You end up getting into these higher levels of culture, and this used to be more and more of the past, and where we're headed is here. And like where does AI come into play? And I think it's going to be more volume, more chaos, more production. So it's going to be probably lower here on the top to where we're headed. And then again, thinking through some of these patterns, like I've always been interested in fine art, but also like how does that tie back to your everyday? How does that tie back to, companies and just capitalism? Like being very aware of like the full stack of as you are creating. So I'm thinking like art goes through all these stages. Like you have the first idea, which is the state of the art, the innovation, that starts in like science papers. Like, so for example, for AI, there's a lot of white papers that you can start reading and start getting access to, like GitHub repos. And this is what's then starts the next stage of like a startup or open source. Like Stable Diffusion is an open source model started from one of these innovations. And slowly through that, you end up seeing artists that adopt these open source technologies and start making gallery shows and having like exhibitions talking about like the impact and culture. And eventually, and I'm not sure what has done this directly, but like, for example, there's definitely apps where you can use Stable Diffusion really easily. There, you're not going to make like a work of art that's going to show in like a museum just from that app, but it's a very simple commodity that's just in your phone. And like where we're headed is like how does this end up at your local Walmart or superstore? Like maybe there's going to be some kind of like future AI like Tamagotchi that uses Stable Diffusion, or some kind of like machine that you can talk to that helps like children play with the idea of like AI visuals, for like $9, like some quick level of like accessibility. And then another one that I'm trying to still think through, and we kind of briefly talked about this, is just like this is such a crazy trend. And I was talking to an artist, Carla Ganis, and she was reminding me, she's like, oh, by the way, the singularity is for 2048. Like, we're we're not too far off from these very interesting trends in technology, where if you're in the creative space, you're kind of already starting to sense where some of these things are headed. So thinking a lot through language and art and technology, they're related, right? Like language is a technology. It just depends on how you think about it, because programming comes from language as well, or like how we talk in networks, whether it's symbolic through emojis, or in the past through hieroglyphics, or again, painting can be a very symbolic thing. And then we're in this uncanny valley state with art, with GPT-3, with DALL-E, with Stable Diffusion. And it's constantly moving to, some kind of singularity, where we're just converging more and more between what language we were used to and now language impacted by technology. So I think this is super important. Like I think about all the people that don't really have they never train their visual space in their mind. Like when they think of words or ideas or things like this, they're not able to think of colors or like an angle or a composition or a location. And these are the kind of people that now have access to Stable Diffusion and DALL-E. And it's mind blowing. Like one thing I'm always aware of is in crypto, for example, there's the adoption rate of someone to onboard into the Web3 space is a lot harder because you need a wallet, you need to want to understand blockchain. And with AI, you just got to put your text input. You got to put in your idea. Like, what's that thing that drives you to even care about creating something? And you don't have to have imagination directly, like not the detailed one. You just have to have the input. It might not even be your own. And so I think now with because we don't have to have as much imagination space, like some of us do, some of us, have other skills that complement that. Like what language models will let you do is look at that whole space of visual pixels and see where you lean towards. Uh, and it's I don't know anything quite like it. I mean, I try to relate it a lot to radio, a lot to TV, where maybe you find a channel that's like, oh, that's my kind of channel. So,
Mm.
instead of channels, you have language models, and you're like, this is my area in the latent space where I like to explore. And yeah, just thinking also through math. Obviously, math is what's driving a lot of the things that become technology. And it's like they have this concept of imaginary numbers and irrational numbers. And, memes can be seen as these very irrational um, pieces of content, and AI art also being this like very complex and imaginary space that now is more accessible. So I think we're like in a cultural visual standpoint, we're kind of operating in some of the things that math was doing only in the number space. It's now accessible like expression mechanism. Uh, yeah, and like what is the relationship between human intelligence and machine intelligence? And some of it can be very technical, and some of it is definitely metaphoric. But this idea of like machines are deep dreaming, like one of the first models to come out, Google's Deep Dream, kind of started alluding to where we're at now, is that they're able to imagine objects within pixels that aren't there technically. Like they just train the model to see things in there. So we have this concept of optimization in machines. And, for us, that's experience. It's like we learn, and it's like, oh, no, they optimize. Or for them, it's inferencing, and we have intuition. We have reflection, and they have back propagation. Uh, this is like a technology, right? Like what's happening here is there was this artist that's using the refraction of the light going into this lens, and they're now able to project the image and make a painting. So just other ways to think through like how you have a technology that allows you to make art through like a new kind of lens. Going like, the core, how does the core idea then become like full on engineering? So you always have this connection between the idea and like a full mechanical thing that's maybe not artistic, but it's like has such a great impact. Again, just thinking about the trends in exponential growth with AI, the past from 2020 actually took 3 to 4 months and doubling. Like we've seen more papers come out in the past, this since 2010, that it's
Mm-hmm.
just gonna keep going. Uh, I think this is one of the last patterns, but just thinking through what are the tools that you can use right now to use AI, and there's different levels of complexity and possibility. So if you just go to googledeepdream.com, you can do very simple like 2015, 2016 images, but you start getting introduced to the concept, and then you have other, very simple service tools to do the same thing. Like Topaz is for AI augmentation, like making more frames, making higher quality images. Art Breeder is kind of like a simple thing. You don't have to train it in a very complicated way. But as you go up, you can use Runway, which, for example, does image segmentation, Epsynth, which is really great for like style transfer with, it's called like like flow synthesis. I think it's basically it's like as an image moves, the pixels stay with that flow. But then you start getting more complicated now when you start getting into programming. So you have Google Colab, Jupyter, Keras, and then now once you get really deep, you're working with the tensors themselves, like with the model, like understanding tensors is like a very mathematical, hardcore way. Now you're like at the machine learning engineering stage where these kinds of devs that are artistic, they're they create the tools that artists use to make AI art.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna take a sip of water.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and then just to connect it back to kind of the big boom we've seen in maybe like the last 6, 8 months. We've heard a lot about DALL-E and things, but these multimodal models that are able to understand an image, kind of like that chair that I was mentioning, where it's the sculpture, it's the definition, it's the image. Like models are able to understand the definition of an object through audio, video, and photo, and we'll be able to take any one of these as inputs and turn them into the other. So you can give it a photo of maybe like a rock band, and it'll make audio of a rock band. Um,
Mhm.
and it's just been we're literally in like a toy stage, like this fun toy stage, at least for the technology standpoint of like where it can go and how we can find value in using this. All digital media will be AI media. That's just a personal kind of trend that I think I see through. All cameras are already using some kind of augmented um, lens thing. They're gonna make it of higher quality. They already do face recognition on the face in order to maybe do some kind of augmentation to like whether it's makeup or age, augmentation. And just thinking through different kinds of commodities. I'm really interested. Like, yes, I like making art, but it's like there's this other thing which is like an invention that becomes something everyone uses that isn't art, but it makes a huge impact on culture. And like how can you have those two things at play and maybe they relate to each other? Uh, and just yeah, just thinking through like 20 from 2000 to 2050 again to that like singularity standpoint. Like, what are the kind of commodities that we can kind of find, maybe adopt, or maybe critique, or just think through like how we want to react to what's coming our way. And in AI in particular, like where a lot of the new uh, technology is heading is like real time and complexity. You'll always see, there is definitely a lot of bias in the AI space. These models aren't perfect. There's just a lot of wrong things with them. Um, and we can make them more complex and try to make them more detailed so that we actually have more control over what we're trying to say and not feel like the bias of the model is taking over uh, our own kind of message. And then also going towards real time. One of the few models that you can already start using is in real time is style transfer. So this is already on their way. Uh, but then again, where does that come to 2050 where maybe we have some of these scans or LLMs in real time? These are just the number of AI papers since 1994 to 2021, because there's definitely a lot of innovation in this space. And this is coming from the A16Z games diagram.
Hmm.
Um, and just thinking again about creative acceleration is what are those things that the machine can do that you could do, but now that you can kind of collaborate with the model in order to kind of just adapt or transform your creative process. Like if you're interested in these kind of things, and just thinking how like the preparation and incubation of an idea, a machine can help collaborate on that. And here you have this concept of course, so the machine can make a lot of course preparation, a lot of course incubation, and then you as a human, you curate that idea and that process in order to get to your fine result. where you actually have a human decide like, oh no, this is an artwork, this is a film, this is a quality, content object. Just looking in Google Trends also, like what is the search of, the most used tools of Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E in the past year. And all of my process that I've been sharing with you guys links back to my newest NFT, where I generated and curated 5,000 pictures with AI every single day from June 21st to November 27th this year, 2022.
And this is 5,000 images a day, not total?
Total.
Okay.
So I was making a total of 5,000 images that make
Okay.
up the one-of-one NFT.
Yeah.
A day, I was making hundreds, definitely hundreds of images.
Yeah.
It got up to a total of 40,000 images that I curated down in order to make it feel human, like make it feel like it was my own. I think that's the relation that I'm trying to understand when making this type of work is like, how do you automate a process, but also feel like you own the automation or you own the curation or the message at the end of the day. And for me, this was very, obviously related to the 5,000 every days by people, where, he's arduously working in a single piece every single day. While in my version, I'm working on hundreds of images that I curate down to get to a similar number. And in less than a year, before when that piece came out, when the people every days came out, I didn't think this was possible at that time, like to think about creating at that magnitude, at that scale of like 5,000 images. And now, if anything, like a lot of people have asked me, it's like, why did it take you so long to make 5,000 images? And it's like, funny you ask, like that's just where we're at right now. We're like, we need to talk about this. Like we need to understand, like, what does it mean that you can produce so much content? Like, what does that mean for quality or for curation or for, in a single image? Like why are people making single images when you can make hundreds? Or there's just a lot at play now that we have access to these models. This is kind of what got me into the production standpoint too. Like, so I was making a few algorithms where I would have these variables to make the prompts, but I would also go and ask GPT-3 to make prompts for me. So I would give it like 20 potential ideas for names for my new biotech startup. This is my close friend Jamil. He is great at making chatbots. And so he gives them a list to GPT-3, and then based on that list, the model creates a more, it just kind of understands what that pattern is you're looking for. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to, I'll just take it to the website where you can see the work. So here you can see this is the full image. And it's this concept of an artificial body of work. Like before it took you, decades to think about a body of work. And now these are things we can start talking about a lot sooner. See a little bit of my socials and things like that. The piece is already minted. There's the full IPFS. This might take really long to load, but it's the full image. So it's about 300 megabytes. And yeah, I'm just about to go and put it up for auction. I'm really interested in like, what's the value of AI art? I think there's a lot of people, totally afraid and unsure and uncertain about what does it mean when everyone can make these high quality images. What are they worth anything? And for me to make 5,000 of them and talk about an NFT that has like an auction and like people bid on this value, and like there's a lot of speculation there. And I think in general there's a lot of speculation in art and technology, and more with AI. So you can kind of scroll through here and see all of the works. But yeah, no, that's my presentation. So thank you, Eric, again for the opportunity to talk about the piece and things. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wonder if you don't mind answering a couple questions, if you've got
Yeah,
some time.
totally. Yep.
Um, and we sort of talked a little bit about some questions I might ask, but I'm going to throw you a curveball. But I was interested in looking at the 5,000 pictures that you've curated down, and then linking that to the work that you made earlier that you showed us at the very beginning of the presentation. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you've noticed changed in the process. Because the initial photographs that I see are there's a very clear concept there that when you first showed them, I have to admit, I didn't know whether you had photographed them or if they were DALL-E 2 generated images. It took me a minute. So I'm just wondering, both conceptually and sort of um, workflow wise, what changed as you were going through these 5,000 images that you were making compared to the way you used to make an image? How did you go about it differently?
I mean, I would say like it's the same process. I just had to make decisions to scale. So I
Mm,
did have to find patterns in my own production thinking that made me think like, oh, this is worthy enough of an image to be curated down into this space. So I created different word banks and different ways in which like what I could make through a drawing or through a photograph, I was still able to make through AI, but I would encourage myself to be like, I have infinite material
mm,
without money. Like I don't even need money to have access to material right now. Like I could be a metalsmith sculptor in an AI artwork without, welding. And so, coming from sculpture or coming from like making a physical object where before I would have to be like, oh, I gotta order this on Amazon, gotta wait for it to ship, I gotta build it, I gotta wait for like 3 p.m. to have good lighting.
mm-hmm,
Like here I'm like grateful that I don't have to make those decisions in like a very physical way, but I have to make them in the prompt. And
mm-hmm,
and for me too is like how do you make sure that the image speaks to that idea that you want to say? So in some way it should be able to communicate something that maybe doesn't quite have to have like words or language for it, but you look at the image and you're thinking through maybe a similar kind of thing that got me to making the prompt. But definitely scale was a very big transformation. I think that helped me change a lot of my process because I needed to uh, make hundreds of images and curate them and think through like uh, words and modifiers and what are the things that attract me, what are the things that don't quite for me make an artwork. What are the kind of materials I've always wanted to play with,
mm.
like here for example I got to play with bones a lot, like, and I think anything that's related to like being human and then being hardware or metal and being able to like weld them in like an image is like, oh, that's very refreshing to do because it's very frustrating to do physically. So
Yeah.
I guess I encourage people to, whether there's a lot of uh what's it called, like debate and just contentiousness in the digital space and opinions. If you come as an illustrator, I totally understand it. Like this is the craziest rug you've ever experienced, and there's a lot of fear in there. But as someone new coming in as a creator, um, just try to take the tool for what it is and be respectful of maybe do's and don'ts in terms of modifiers. Like,
Mm,
like in my work in particular, modifiers was never my interest. It was always I'm like if it was photorealistic, that's where I live every day. Like we live in the real world. So like the more real it can look, great. Like it doesn't have to look like Picasso or
mhm.
Rothko or whoever. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of the process.
Speaking of controversies, I wanted to ask you about particular controversies that are out there around AI art and thoughts you might have on them. What's your sort of pet peeve or favorite controversy or most controversial sort of opinion? Up to you how you want to take that, but I'm curious where you stand on some of the bigger controversies around AI art at the moment.
I mean, I think for modifiers, that's definitely the one that would be awesome to find a solution. Like if there was a way that living artists got royalties if you use their modifier, I think that would be so cool. I just think that that's the kind of thing where if the model is trained on your hard, work as an artist, and you're using that modifier, and there was a way to, if you're selling an NFT, to have, send some percentage to the creator, I think that that just solves a lot of the backlash from, previous generations that are just, asking in a very honest way, like, hey, what about what about me? Like, this is based on my data set, or however
Mm,
that is. And I think it's a technological problem that we could solve. We could
mm,
solve if we cared enough. Um, some funnier ones. I like when people like just have this really big bold statement about what AI art is, and they like tweet about it, and they say like AI art is art because etc. And like just the fact that they're going out there and like making that statement, to me is like, okay, like people are still very um caring. They care about like this movement or this definition. They have a personal kind of um definition of what that is, and that keeps them going forward. And I mean, you definitely have a lot of people that hate on that, and I like to be aware of those as well, because it's subtle everywhere. Like there could be what's it called, like debate about should it be used in schools, like some people that's such a like contentious thing, like if you're applying somewhere. I know a friend of mine, he works at SCAD, and he was saying they don't let anyone use it there for like the video games they make. And is crazy because AI is kind of disrupting the video game space right now. Like most new innovative games are probably going to use AI, and for a school to be like so fearful that you're gonna lose merit or things, it's like, well, in the real world, like it's just finding the right idea and execution that makes the new version of that like be better with AI. Yeah, I think those, and then the hard one for me, and that's why I made this artwork, is automation. Like, how
mm.
fair is automation? How much should we be able to automate things? And it's one I want to keep pushing on. And like I'm still yet I still have to, every now and then people makes a tweet and says people to share their AI art inspired by his work. And
Uh-huh.
that's kind of like a moment I'm gonna like find, and then like try to get that interaction with him, and just think through, what do people what happens when automation just becomes something everyone can do? Like, what's the value of images or art in general? Like, where is this stuff headed? And um there's just many layers to it. Yeah, I could talk about this forever.
Well, it's
But
funny because a lot of times when I hear criticisms of AI, well, I've got a few things to say, but one of them is when I hear criticisms of AI art, the sort of simple one is like, oh, you could do that in 10 seconds, it doesn't count. And then what's kind of funny is that your process actually makes it incredibly time consuming, but with the time that not most people, with the time that some people would use to create a single artwork, you now have curated 5,000, which is more than I don't know, are in many museums,
normal,
right?
yeah.
So this question of like time, like, oh, how much work did you put into it, as a way of evaluating art, is turned on its head, which is what I like about your piece and bringing that in. And it's great that you hit this note of scale, which is you can do one piece in 15 seconds, and that most of that 15 seconds is the rendering, right? But what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with the ability to make 5,000 images? Or what are you going to do with the ability to make one image in 15 seconds? And this introduces a new way of thinking, a conceptual way of thinking about what you want to actually do with this tool and the power that it puts at your fingertips. Which is, just to continue back to something else you said, for students thinking about this stuff, you just panicked by saying, oh, schools don't allow it in their portfolio, right? Which is maybe the case. But if you create a compelling body of work using AI, and you say, here's a picture I made with AI, a lot of those schools are going to say, we're not interested in that, right? They're going to be interested in saying, why did you make this picture with AI? And if you can justify that decision, if you can say I've done something besides just make a picture, right? Then you have a reason to keep it in your
Yeah.
portfolio, right? And maybe this changes, right? Maybe someday people are open to this idea that you write something and you generate this beautiful picture and you can put this in your portfolio, no questions asked. But for the time being, it is about a little bit of this like thinking through, what do you want to do with the tool? What do you want to do with the power that it puts at your fingertips? And how are you going to interact with your art making in a different way? And I think your presentation wrapped that up really nicely as a way of thinking through some of these issues. So
Yeah.
thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you so
Any
much. I'm
final thoughts or?
um yeah, no, just love for everyone to check out the work, everydays.ai. My Twitter, like it'll Moises Sanabria. You could find me there. And then just a last kind of thing is like I'm really interested in like the impact of AI in culture in general. And so I'm starting this 24/7 live stream called
Yeah.
AI 24. So if anyone has any interest in exhibiting some of their artwork in any capacity, whether it's performance or images or video, even music collaborations, I just think there's AI is going to do more for the world than just for art, and to be able to, as a creative person, we live in all those stages. We're not just artists. You know, we have work, we have like labor in different places. Like we're people as where that just express ourselves, and I think AI is going to hit all of those more than just art. And so for me, this channel is about that. It's about all those layers, and like how do we get better at not being fearful of the technology, and just kind of educate ourselves, and then be critical, like be aware, like definitely call stuff out where you need to, um but find a community through which you can do that with. And so AI 24 is that for me. And I'll share with you guys the links for that. And yeah, feel free to reach out for any questions. I my wife and I love to teach these things as well, and just connect with people in this space. And that's how I connected with Eric. So glad to be here.
Yes. Well, cool. Thanks again. And yeah, I'll put those links up, and we'll share those with the students, and maybe you'll see some student work in your submission feed for AI 24.
Yeah, awesome.
All
We'll
right.
reconnect again. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, cheers.